Welcome to the session of Talking Tech, Women and Girls in ICT. My name is Kathy, and today I am delighted to be representing Ernst & Young Canada and the Inclusive Cyber Project, which is an initiative I founded within the Global Shapers Community to empower non-technical talent to transition into cybersecurity roles. I'm therefore very excited to be having a discussion about tech and tech careers with the lovely Sofie Maddens, who is the head of regulatory and market environment division at Telecommunications Development Bureau of the International Telecommunication Union. Talking Tech is a series that's celebrating girls and women in tech being recorded around the world. The two Girls in ICT Day 2020 and Girls in ICT Day 2021. Girls in ICT Day is an international day marked on the fourth Thursday of each April. So for this year, it will take place on the 22nd of April. The objectives of Girls in ICT Day are to help create a global environment that empowers and encourages girls and young women to consider studies and careers in the growing field of information and communication technologies. The Talking Tech series is brought to you by the ITU, where Sofie works, UNICC, and the Office of the UN Secretary General's Envoy on Youth, and is in support of Equals, the global partnership for gender equality in the digital age. I'm really excited to, return to the UN environment. I used to be an intern at UNCTAD in New York, so big fan of all the work they're doing in championing diversity and inclusion in the digital sphere. Now, the Global Shapers Montreal Hub is very pleased to be a partner on the session today. The goals of the series is to, among others, interest and inspire girls and young women with information about a range of ICT careers that can be had, bring before a broader audience some of the role models, women in tech, share information about their career journeys and work. So today we'll have a chance to dive a little bit deeper into Sofie's journey, offer diverse examples of how ICT is being used to support achievements of the Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, and other UN goals, showcase initiatives that are working with girls to support them in ICT studies or future ICT careers, provide girls and young women in tech with leadership opportunities to represent and promote the Girls in Tech organization with which they're involved and promote it to a broader international audience. So to kick the session up, I'm going to introduce you a little bit to the Inclusive Cyber Talent Project. So when I first pivoted to cyber from a public policy background, I really experienced firsthand the false equivalence between cyber and IT, and that is really reinforced by the recruitment culture. It subsequently prompted me to launch the Inclusive Cyber Project through the Global Shapers Community, which is an initiative of the World Economic Forum. The project empowers non-technical talent to transition into cybersecurity careers by maximizing the potential of their transferable skills and thus closing the confidence gap. So a key motivator for the project was my recognition that women are often underrepresented in IT to begin with, and we cannot continue to artificially limit talent sourcing to IT backgrounds. I'm really delighted to shift the conversation to Sofie to discuss, among other topics, how more women can overcome the confidence gap and make a career pivot to ICT and tech sectors. So, Sophie, I am going to kick off. I think I would like to first understand a bit more about when and how did you get into your current role as head of regulatory and market environment at the ITU? Did you always envision yourself going into tech?
So I officially joined the ITU as the head of the regulatory and market environment in 2015, January of 2015. But in fact, I had worked as a consultant with ITU since 1999. So I was a little bit like the adopted child finding their family. So I came into the fold of the ITU in 2015. But I really started working in 1999. And did I always envision myself going into tech? No, not at all. Mm-hmm. It was almost an accident that happened, and that was a really fortunate accident that happened. So I'm actually Belgian, and I'm a lawyer by training. And when I started my career, I started, like you, Kathy, doing an internship with an international organization, in that case, the European Commission. And I worked for the Secretariat General in the European Commission as a lawyer. And it was a fascinating time at the in Europe, because it was the time of Jacques Delors. It was the time of the four freedoms. It was the real motor of the development, the integration of Europe, and the start to bringing more countries into the European Union. But it was very much legal work. And then in the work as an intern, I worked following the Economic and Social Committee and really following the social charter at that time. And so that brought me more into the social issues. And then after leaving the commission, obviously after an internship, you look for a job. So I started with a boutique consulting company in Brussels. And there were two dossiers that were passed my way. One was the famous banana case, the import of bananas in the EU, and it was the banana and the dole case. And the other one was the legal protection of computer software, which was fascinating because it was a time that you had, on the one hand, Japan, on the other hand, the US, and the whole issue was about the reverse engineering of computer software and the legal protection of computer software. And that was at the same time as the GATS negotiation, the TRIPS, trims, and services. And that's how I gradually started getting into, because I found it fascinating. And that's what got me into the more international work and also into the lobbying sphere and starting to understand technology. So did I envision myself going into tech? No, I could have been a legal specialist in the import of fruits into the European Union, but it was that tech side that caught my passion and paved the way towards the rest of my work. And as we talk, you'll see that I'm actually the daughter of a diplomat. And so I traveled a lot throughout my life. We started in Romania in the 1960s. That gives away my age. Then we went to the United States in the 1960s as well, where I actually was in Yankee Shea Stadium when the men landed on the moon. And we had the eagle has landed on the big screen. And so again,
that is amazing.
Again, technology. And we saw the ticker tape parade with Neil Armstrong with the three astronauts coming by New York. So in that NASA, the man on the moon, always was part of my life. But the social, the empathy was also part of my life as well, because we came back to Belgium and then we went to Kenya. I went to Africa. I crossed the equator the first time when I was 13 years old. And we lived in Africa for 6 years. And then I came back to Belgium and studied law. And my parents continued with their career. And can you imagine, Kathy, that we were allowed to call my parents when they were in Guatemala in the early 80s? We were allowed to call them once a month for 3 minutes. And each of those 3 minutes cost $15 a minute, which at that time was a lot of money. Even today, it's a lot. And so we wrote our little scripts, and we wrote letters every week. But for me to be able to keep in touch with my husband who lives in one country, my son who lives on the other side of the ocean in the United States, and to be able to use ICTs. You see, ICTs for me is something that has made my life. And so I didn't always envision myself going into tech, but once I started touching upon the tech and seeing the effect that it has on people, that's what sparked my passion. And thinking of those that are still not connected, and thinking of all the Zuckerbergs out there, the boy who harnessed the wind, the story from Malawi, thinking of all the geniuses out there that we can bring school books to through ICTs. We can bring knowledge, we can share knowledge, we can spark their intelligence through ICTs. That's what sparked my passion. And as you see, I'm still very passionate about it.
Yeah, I hear that passion exuding through you as you speak, and what an inspirational journey. I also got my start in the tech world very accidentally. So that piece definitely resonates with me a lot. I want to go back to something that you touched upon, which is how the empathy and the social aspect is so intertwined in technology. And I mention this because people often think of technology and tech and ICT as solely about the technology itself, but you're absolutely right. It is very intertwined with this human element. From your beginnings as a lawyer and through your work in policy and international affairs, how do you see this interplay in the tech sector? And what new groundbreaking governance frameworks or regulations do you foresee in the digital ecosystem?
I think this last year has made it even more clear that digital is really at the center of our societies. Digital is at the center of us being able to remain connected at a social level, at a professional level, at a financial level. So the fact that digital is so intertwined into creating opportunities for us to live, to stay connected, to be able to talk to our family, to our friends, to be able to keep in touch, that is a fact. But the fact is as well that this technology, the goods and services, everything is evolving at a breakneck speed. And we saw it this last year. And so we've had to reconcile ourselves as policymakers, as regulators, is that despite our best efforts, often we still struggle. And what's been very interesting about this COVID pandemic is that often we still struggle, but the fact that it's so important has really unlocked some of the bottlenecks because we've realized it's so important. So although before a year ago, we were always lamenting that we're lagging behind industry innovation, that the regulation is too slow to develop, the fact that we've realized its importance has fast-tracked some of our efforts. And I truly, truly hope that once we get out of this pandemic, that sense of urgency will remain. But it's also a perpetual circle. So we always have to keep on adapting our ecosystems to these unforeseen challenges. Who would have said, it's almost a year that we've been home. Who would have said a year ago that we were working from home and that the networks had to be able to keep up with everybody working from home, with kids schooling from home, with Xboxes or whatever they're called, because I don't have that here in my house, but with all this capacity required. So I think we've seen that technologies are really in the spotlight and that all of us are playing an instrumental role in defining the new normal for a post-COVID world. And that's for us who are lucky, who are connected. Think of all of those that are not connected and who can't go to school, who don't have health services, who don't have government services. So even though the pace of change in ICT keeps on accelerating and the importance has really become crystal clear, that digital transformation, while it's a reality for some, it's distant for many. And also one thing I want to say, Kathy, is that although we're living in this period of hope, of aspiration, I can't live without my phone glued to my hand. The same time, we've seen misuse of profiling, we've seen data commercialization, we've seen harmful behaviors rise. And so we really need to deal with that. And our plans and processes need to allow us to respond as rapidly as possible, but also in a considered and coherent manner. So I think we actually have a huge weight on our shoulders, those of us who are in tech, because it's not just about the technology, it's because the ICT sector underpins every other economic activity. And I'd add to it that ICTs underpin so many of our social activities as well. And it's also a foundation for a host of social services. So it's a vital driver of this economic and personal growth. And it's a transformational catalyst that can overturn chronic development paradigms. And it can overcome the tyranny of distance so that we can get access to education, to health. Billions of us can, everyone. But as I said, not everyone is connected. And it's essential that we ensure connectivity for everyone in the interests of our lives and our well-being. So I mean, we're doing this interview through a video conferencing platform. We've seen these apps, we've seen the other digital tools. All of them have come to the fore, but we do need to work on the efficiency, the safety, and the security. And also, I'll give you some numbers here. 3.6 billion people still remain unconnected. A lot of them live in least developed countries, developing countries, but a lot of them also live in our developed countries. And then also the proportion of women using the internet is 48% compared to 58% of men. So women's internet use in developing countries is falling behind. And if you look at some of the reports that have come out, I think the pandemic has made that divide even worse. The girls and women who didn't have access to the internet, who weren't connected before the pandemic, I don't think it's gotten better in the last year. And that has created huge losses. I would say economic losses, social losses, personal losses. Also broadband. Even though we say these billions of people are connected, more than 50% of the world is connected. Even those that are connected, many of those either don't use it just for simple voice, don't use it effectively, oftentimes because affordability issues. So affordability issues, not just of the connectivity, but also of the handset, the devices, are a key element to address. Also, lack of digital skills. The fact that one has a smartphone doesn't mean necessarily that one is able to use smartphones effectively. And then also, let's not forget persons with disabilities. When my father was aging, so after all these years, my mother died when she was quite young, so my father stayed alone. My brother lived on one side of the world. I lived on the other side of the world. My father, after his career, went back to Belgium. He was all alone. We bought him a computer when he was 70 years old. And for him, it was a window to the world, his world, the world of his children and his grandchildren with whom he was able to speak. Then he got glaucoma, and then an operation on his eyes went bad. So he became a person with disabilities. He couldn't see well. So for him, then at that time, 20 years ago, having a big screen with big letters with websites that had accessibility built into them, again, was a lifesaver. So let's think of women, of girls, but also all the groups that we need to think of so that we include everyone. Because that universal access, that everyone has access to these ICTs, that's very important, especially within these emergency times. And that's consistent with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, the Broadband Commission for Sustainable Development's targets. All of them say effective policies must enable access to affordable and good quality broadband services and facilitate digital inclusion, including developing digital skills, so that we women and girls and persons with disabilities, that everybody can have access to this wonderful tools of ICTs, and that they also have relevant content in their language and applications.
Mm-hmm. So well said, Sofie. So well said. I, really resonate with what you said about the enormous responsibility that we have to get it right, to set the necessary norms and policies that can harness the potential of ICTs to build more inclusive societies. I definitely seen rise of new vulnerabilities. I work in cybersecurity and privacy. So, throughout the pandemic, I've seen new cybersecurity and privacy risks emerge with new technologies. It's always this double-edged sword, right, that we're grappling with. On the one hand, there's enormous potential for ICT. On the other hand, it's how do we get ahead of these potential vulnerabilities? So, no, I definitely resonate with a lot what you said. I want to pivot a little bit towards what you said about the digital divide that we're seeing, and the digital divide that doesn't seem to be narrowing. So you've moved around the world as a sort of a diplomat from country to country. What are some different approaches that you've seen over the years in different corners of the world? Efforts that are moving more girls and women into tech, efforts that are looking to close the digital divide, not just for women, but as you said, for all other vulnerable and marginalized groups.
I'm a real advocate of holistic approaches. One needs to have a vision. And if our vision is that we include everyone, that we include women and girls, that we include persons with disabilities, that holistic inclusive approach is key. And that needs to be built in from the start. If we consider accessibility for all, if we consider that ICTs, okay, just let the markets work and build it and they will come. I'm afraid that build it and they will come without having that holistic approach won't reach its target. There's an element of advocacy there as well, Kathy, because our policymakers need to understand, think holistically, think inclusively from the start. Let me give you an example. In Portugal in the 1990s, they crafted a licensing regime for 3G at that time. That was very visionary, that was very forward-looking. They crafted their licensing policy, and Portugal was a very poor country in the 1970s, 1980s. It was one of the developing countries of Europe. It was a country that had enormous political and economic struggles. It had many rural areas. It had a whole stream of emigration, and the inner parts of Portugal, many of them were very poor. In the 1980s, on the other side of the river of Lisbon, the waiting time for a fixed line connection was up to 15 years. Today, Portugal is ahead of many of the Nordic, of the most developed countries, because Portugal is a most developed country now. But they're ahead of some of countries, some of the showcase countries on the use of mobile in terms of penetration and use. But go back to 1999. It was actually the UN Secretary General that was Prime Minister at that time, Antonio Guterres. And Portugal was also at the leading the Europe initiatives and all bringing the ICTs at the center of policy. You had the licensing regime that in the UK and Germany, they said, we're going to go for auctions. We want to bring a lot of money into the budget. Prime Minister at that time, Guterres, said, no, I want to bring my country, I want to make use of ICTs, the Information Society, as it was called at that time. I want to use this rich tool to fast forward my country into the 21st century. So what they did is they actually crafted the licensing regime in which 50% of the evaluation criteria for the licensing was innovative information society projects, in which they said, bring ICTs to schools, to hospitals, to government agencies throughout the country, and that will count in your licensing bid. So that happened, and they selected the fourth operator. But what was interesting was that with the market entry fees, they also crafted the one laptop per child. They crafted the bringing laptops to the children in schools. That was great. Okay, now assume that one laptop per child costs, I don't know, a fairly simple laptop at that time. Even the one laptop per child initiative in Portugal, it was called the Magalhães initiative. Assume a laptop costs $100, $200. Now, if as policymaker, you don't think, oh, there's some girls that can't go to school, and that's in COVID as well. People have seen buying laptops when there's more demand, suddenly the laptops become more expensive. So imagine you didn't think about girls that weren't in schools. You didn't think about persons with disabilities. So you didn't think about the need to build the digital skills with girls. You didn't think of having laptops that had accessibility features built into them. Taking the example of accessibility features. If you don't think about this inclusive, holistic approach from the start, your laptop that you're bringing to schools that will cost you $100 or $200, if you have to retrofit them with accessibility features, suddenly it's $1,000 or $2,000. So suddenly, your girls who maybe need some extra digital skills training, or your persons with disabilities will not have the opportunity to benefit from this bringing the ICTs to the people. So Kathy, what I've seen in countries is that those with a more holistic, inclusive approach that really go about it strategically and that are in the more mature regulatory framework, that have regulatory approaches that are inclusive, that are holistic, and that address these issues of inclusivity and accessibility, that really, those countries can go much further.
I almost see a parallel between what you're saying about baking in inclusive, accessible features from the get-go to concept we have in cybersecurity called privacy by design and security by design, because it is so much more expensive to retrofit and bolt on these features than if you had those considerations in the planning stage. And it also allows you to remain agile for change. Right? Because the regulatory platforms are changing all the time. If you're baking these accessibility inclusive features in the beginning, then whatever program or project that you are developing will remain agile to these changing requirements. I love hearing this perspective. You have just such wonderful anecdotes from your experience around the world that really anchor the experiences that we're talking through. Because our talk is focused on women and girls in ICT, I do want to shift the conversation a little bit towards how we can mobilize more young girls and women into ICT careers. As I mentioned earlier, one of the projects I lead in the Global Shapers Community focused on empowering not technical talent into cyber. And one of the biggest challenges I have seen is the confidence gap. You know, that sinking feeling when you're looking at a very technically worded job post that you match very little in description to. What are some of your advice for young girls and women who are looking to enter ICT, but who are feeling that confidence gap in their job search?
As we started our interview, you asked me, did you envision yourself in tech? And nowhere in my mind did I envision myself.
Neither did I. Yeah.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
I had done law school. I was really bad at maths. Not really bad, but it wasn't, as a professor used to tell us in law school, he was a little bit cynical. He said, half of you are here because you can't count, and the other half are here because you can't see blood. So that didn't do medicine or engineering. And
that's not a very empowering prop.
no, but still, those are the kind of concepts we do here. And what I would say to girls is never be afraid to follow your dreams.
No.
And it's what I said at the beginning of the interview, because I saw the men on the moon, because I experienced the importance of, at that time, telephony in my life. When I got the opportunity to veer into the field of ICTs, yeah, there was a lot of things that I was afraid of, and I'll tell you an anecdote a little bit later. But when I
would love to hear.
started working with this, let me say, I won't name the name, but it was at that time the huge computer company, US computer company, so the legal protection of computer software. When we started talking about trips and trims, trade-related intellectual property, trade-related investment measures, services, the GATS Basic Telecommunications Agreement, interconnection, interoperability, it was like Chinese for me. And yet, as a lawyer with my legal background, I focused on some of the legal issues. And then, you know what, never stop learning as well. The very first missions I did for the ITU back in 1999, one of my suitcases would be my clothes, and the other suitcase would be books and papers. And I would read and read and read and prepare for my meetings. I would try to understand. And also, there's never a dumb question when you're working on a project.
100%, yes.
Yeah, just ask, go to the engineers and ask them and say, I don't know what DB means. I don't know what parabolic antennas means. Can you explain it to me so that I understand it? And they're delighted because they don't necessarily understand all the intrinsic of legal drafting. And so that was also when I became a mom in 1996. We decided to move country. So we went to Portugal, and I set up my own consulting company. And I had been working with KPMG at that time. And one of my anchor clients was KPMG. And one of the projects that they allowed me to continue working was, again, within the context of the WTO negotiations, was the working with the European services sector on the trade negotiations, so on looking at the future of the trade negotiations. And there I continue to work with the basic telecommunications agreement and all of those issues. And then I got a client which was launching a new technology, which you've probably heard about, the loon balloons and the stratospheric platforms. And that's how I got involved. So it's basically like the blimps, the balloons, right?
Okay.
So using these stratospheric platforms as at 21 kilometers altitude, so in the stratosphere, as a telecommunications infrastructure. So I got started in that in 1997, and that brought me in the Radio Communications Bureau in the World Radio Communications Conference. And oh my God, Kathy, talking about noise levels and antennas, multi-directional antennas, and there were times that I sweated, that I was like, oh my God, I don't understand anything about it. But reading, listening to the technical experts, and then also admitting that sometimes you can bring in your expertise, but you won't be an expert in everything. So to those girls out there that aren't the whiz kids in science or maths, it doesn't mean you can't get into ICTs. There are different angles of ICTs and the promotion of ICTs, and especially the consumer protection, the social aspect, the user well-being. As you know, the harm, the privacy, the data protection, you don't need to know all the details of the underlying infrastructure. You can have colleagues who are specialists on that who can give their input on interoperability, on interconnection, on quality of service, on quality of experience, but you can bring your angle in there too. So don't be afraid all of us see the importance of ICTs in our life. And there are many things that need to be considered. And I'll bring it back to a regulatory issue here. At ITU, we've really looked at the evolution of regulation. So from regulation, from a command and control approach, where basically it was government, it was the public sector that was providing these services, these telecommunication services, to the gradual liberalization, to more competitive markets, to the realization that ICTs have economic and social impact, to what we're calling now digital transformation. And the fifth generation regulation that underpins that digital transformation, which I called collaborative fifth generation regulation, because as ICTs is really the motor of society that brings these economic and social effects. You think of digital financial inclusion, you think of e-education, you think of e-health, you think of e-government. There is that interlinking of digital, of ICTs with the different sectors. So you need that collaborative regulation. We're in a cross-cutting nature of the digital economy. And so even before COVID, the role of the ICT regulator had already grown significantly, but now we're seeing changes in business models, changes in investment models, changes in the financing of investment in ICT infrastructure, overlaps of digital with finance, of digital with education. And that's led to changes in regulatory processes and approaches. And so there is a role for lawyers. There is a role for lawyers. Concepts, you're in privacy, concepts such as digital identity growing across a number of services and sectors, consumer protection, data protection, confidentiality. So we don't live in a vacuum. There are many overlaps.
It's a very interdisciplinary field and growing more interdisciplinary by the day.
Yeah, and don't think you need to be engineered to get into ICTs. We all have a role to play.
I love that. I love that you said we all have a role to play, because what I've seen is an explosion of different roles in the ICT field. Roles that did not exist a couple of years ago, like the data protection officer was something that was introduced, for instance, by the GDPR. So there are a lot of growing roles that don't even exist yet. And you know, you're right, ICT does not exist in a technical vacuum. ICT is as much about the technology as it is about the people and the processes. And so you're absolutely right. Everyone has a role to play. And I love what you said about your anecdote when you were first getting your start and all this vocabulary of what is, you know, interoperability and all these language antennas. I went through the same when I was getting my start in cyber. Exactly. I did not know the difference between a virus and a worm, and everyone just insisted talking acronyms. Right? There were just all these technical acronyms, and I have to work bilingually, so you know there's a whole other set of acronyms in French, which makes it all the more confusing. But I took the time to learn, and like you said, I took the time to ask the questions. Yeah. And I found that, you know, everyone has a growth mindset because they know the knowledge and the skills are evolving so fast that no one has all the circumscribed knowledge. So everyone has to continue to learn, and so we're learning together in a way. So I love the message that you're sharing with anyone who's listening to our talk is, yeah, there is a role for you. And, you know, just even if you don't understand all the vocabulary from the get-go, there are opportunities to upskill and unlearn and relearn. So I think that's just a wonderful message. I guess that what I want to, you know, finish my questions with to you on is, you mentioned earlier that you have an anecdote about your experiences pivoting into the ICT. I was hoping we could close on any challenges that you have encountered along your career. How did you overcome them, and your closing thoughts on a career in tech for girls and young women?
So, one of obviously as woman in profession, woman in tech, there was that sense of insecurity. So
Yeah.
the need for the confidence that I'd like to ask you later, Kathy, how did you gain the confidence to really get into this field? How do you think we can get this confidence to get more girls and women into the tech field? As I said, I overcame that challenge by lifelong learning, by trying to really to learn more and more and to recognize my limits as well. And then also the eternal, and that's for women in tech, but women in all professions. Never ever think that you have to choose between a family and a career. I always use the technologies to be able to keep my family going. And as I say, we all three live in different countries, but the ICTs have really allowed me to be able to do homework with my son when I was on the other side of the world. So always don't let the fact that you want different angles in life stop you. And so I think I agree that women are often unrepresented in IT to begin with, that there is that threshold here, that there are artificial limits to talent sourcing to IT backgrounds, or even to girls in STEM education.
Absolutely.
So we need that confidence to be able to join this area of work. For me, the confidence came later in life because I always thought that if I wasn't good in maths and in physics, that I would never be able to enter this field of work. If somebody would have told me when I was younger, okay, you do need to, don't give up on your maths and your physics and read your maths and your physics, but if you study other things that you're stronger in, you will be able to have a career in tech. I think that's what I would have wanted to hear at that time. What about you? How did you get the confidence to be able to join this area of work, Kathy?
Yeah, so I it's very similar to you, Sophie. I came from a public policy background, and when I was studying poli sci undergrad, I think everyone thought the path forward was a career in law. So that was the path that I thought was ahead of me. And in my last semester of my 2 years master's, I accidentally took some electives on cybersecurity. So this goes back to how I also came onto this very accidentally. I was honestly trying to escape corporate finance at the time. So that's how I got into my cyber courses. And I was just fascinated. As a public policy student, I saw cybersecurity, data privacy as public good
Yeah.
that can really empower the choices of everyday consumers like you and I, that can safeguard digital trust, that can spur innovation in our society.
Mhm.
I think the first step to overcoming that confidence gap is really dive deep into your motivation. What drives you in this field? What are you passionate about? If you're passionate about safeguarding digital trust, the conversation becomes very different than I'm trying to get to cyber. It's how do you get to that ultimate goal of driving forward what you're passionate about? And is that passion going to ignite you a few years down the road? Right. So I think first is I started with what I was passionate about. And second, I had my, little stumbles in the beginning when I saw these job posts that profile a candidate that looks nothing like me. I was very crestfallen. I was very dejected. I didn't think I had the alphabet soup of technical certifications to go into cyber. But I'll never forget that it was really my professor who impressed upon me that as a finance policy student, you have differentiated perspectives to bring to cyber. You understand the financial regulatory perspective. You understand how to communicate to decision makers who talk about cyber in terms of bottom line, in terms of financial risks. And so instead of positioning who I was not, which is a technical computer science grad, I owned who I was. I became proud of who I was. I proactively and explicitly spelled out my public policy skills to recruiters, to people in the field, and just talk about my value of differentiation, that I could be the translation layer between the technical grads the technical folks and the business decision makers, that I could differentiate what's actual information against background noise. And I think it's really by owning who I was and be authentically myself and sharing with would-be recruiters how I can impact this field that I was able to gain confidence in myself. And not saying that I wasn't knocked down, once I got into the field. Of course, there
We
were
all
so many things I did not know, as you mentioned. Just every day, words that I didn't know, ways of doing things. Technology is evolving so fast. I always feel like I'm playing catch up. And I think this is where that passion you had sustains you in upskilling yourself constantly, in developing that growth mindset, in admitting when you don't know things and putting your hand up to learn more. I think it's these different building blocks that really help me overcome the confidence gap. Yeah.
And you launched this inclusive cyber project through the Global Shapers Community,
Yes.
which is an initiative of WEF, the World Economic Forum.
Yes.
Right? Can you give us some details on your path to this project?
Yeah, absolutely. This is something that I'm so passionate about. It really started with my personal experiences, thinking that if I feel that confidence gap in front of a job post that does not profile somebody like me, what of all the other non-traditional talents out there? How are they feeling? They're going to feel cybersecurity is out of reach for them. Interject with a small anecdote that really illustrate the case, which is I gave a talk at a high school in January 2020. And these high school students, mind you, they're just in high school, came up to me and said, Kathy, I don't think I can go into cyber because I'm not studying a science degree right now. So that perception is cemented so early on. And so I knew that, we had to change that false equivalency between STEM and cyber, between STEM and ICT from a very, very young age. And that linkage, that false equivalence is reinforced by Hollywood, by the movies.
Yeah.
It's also self-reinforced by, like you and I spoke a lot about how we think we're not good at maths and so we can't be in this field. So it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy in some way almost. And if you look at the stats, Sofie, this was a statistic I looked back in 2018, 70% of cyber talent came from an IT background. And so that artificially limits, again, where we're tapping into. And women and persons of color tend to be underrepresented in IT to begin with. And so I thought, I want to affect a paradigm shift in how we recruit, who get to be part of the future of work, how we close the digital divide. And so the Inclusive Cyber Talent Project, we have built a framework where we map out transferable skills from different non-technical disciplines, so that's fine arts, English literature, finance, political science, and we really spell it out how these different transferable skills are relevant and necessary and valuable to cyber. We benchmark these self-reported skills to an internationally recognized cybersecurity standard, the NIST, National Initiative for Cyber Education Standard. And we go to universities, we go to these non-traditional departments, and we just talk to students, we show them, we map out these skills, we show them how you already have what it takes to succeed in a career. And honestly, Sofie, the response we have received have been overwhelming. Students come up to us and say, well, I've never seen my skills in this light before. I've never thought that, the fact that I can read 100 pages a night in my English literature degree helps me with processing the vast amount of information on ICT. And so you start to see these linkages that you would otherwise not have unearthed. But we also approach the project on a demand side. What I mean by this is we work with recruiters, we work with universities who have cybersecurity deployments, and we work with them to make their job notices, make their prerequisites more inclusive to individuals who do not come from a technical background, removing some of the requirements that honestly do not reflect what's needed in the day-to-day. I'm sure if you talk to a lot of people who actually work in tech, their job is very different from what is profiled on a job posting. right?
Absolutely.
So we try to change the language and change the perspectives of these recruiters, these universities, so they are opening the door wider for students from these non-technical and non-traditional backgrounds. So it's been an incredible experience to work with my 12-person team here in Montreal. We have a sister team in Kigali in Rwanda who's tailoring the project to their local context. And yeah, I think COVID has brought this sort of, a great reset in professionals rethinking about the future of work. So I think there's real opportunity for us to really bring this message forth in a post-COVID context.
That's fabulous, Kathy. And in fact, I think our messages dovetail so well.
Absolutely, yes.
The way I was saying, you'd never be scared to get into IT or cybersecurity or ICTs, and your project is absolutely fabulous. I'm really excited to hear about it. I hope we can chat some more because it looks like
I
a
would love
very
to.
fast
Yes,
project.
yes.
So, do you have any messages for other young women in tech, or maybe even not so young women, that you'd like to share?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think I want to mirror what you said, Sofie, about there is a role for everyone, and that no matter what your background is, and whether it's, in STEM, whether it's not in STEM, you have existing valuable skills to bring
Mhm.
to the ICT sector. I think in addition to the other components I touched upon, such as valuing your transferable skills, digging deep into your motivations, I think something else I want to mention is just the power of networking, the power of speaking to others who are working in these different fields. Because not only may they have an opportunity for you, but you get to see the representativeness of different amazing women working in ICT,
Yeah.
what their path have been, like we're chatting now, how non-traditional some of these paths are, how accidental they are, just to illustrate that there is no one path to ICT. There is no one charted A to B to C, and that you really get an opportunity to create your path from, whichever background you're coming from. And through talking to these amazing women, you will also see that there are many different roles in ICT. That's not just, a technical program manager. It's not just a lawyer, even though both of us come very much from that legal policy background. There are many of these other roles, like Sophie, you mentioned more, so the consumer rights perspective that's really, emerging these days. Privacy is very, top of mind these days as well. Through these conversations, you start to discover just the diversity of roles that exist in ICT,
Mhm.
and you start to see that a career in this field is not just possible, but it's well within reach through these many different paths.
Absolutely. Oh, this was fascinating,
I
Kathy.
know, me too.
I very much enjoyed talking to you, and I think our stories really complemented each other. So
Yeah,
it was absolutely fascinating. It was a wonderful conversation, Kathy. I really, really enjoyed it, and looking forward to speaking to you and to build that message. I think both of us have said it very clearly. There are many paths towards ICTs and towards a career in ICTs. Think of what contribution you can make, and as you
absolutely.
say, think of your passion and what
Mhm.
motivates you, and that will set out that career. That will put the lights at the edge of your pathway, so that
I love that metaphor. Yes. Sophie, this was such an energizing conversation for me. Honestly, if I had the opportunity to speak to somebody like you when I was undergoing all my doubts in my career transition, I think it would have really crystallized my resolve and commitment earlier to take the plunge into ICT. So I really hope that your message and our combined message resonates with the young women and girls who are listening, and do listen to the other talks that are part of this ITU equals Talking Tech program. I'm sure you'll hear many other really inspiring stories.
thank you so much, Kathy, and keep carrying that flame, keep carrying that passion, because it's passion that really helps us achieve what motivates us.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much, Sophie.
Thank you, Kathy. Have a
Yeah.
great day.